Welcome to A Matter of Honor. We're going to do a playthrough and share some thoughts what I like, dislike about the game. So kind of a review at the same time-ish, but more playing. I've tried to situate the light and cut down on some glare, but there's always a little bit of glare. So hopefully not too bad. Plus, I'll probably pause the camera when I shift and move in. This is the camera kind of pulled out at an overhead so you can kind of see the entire layout. The layout was real easy to do. So setup, you just kind of follow one side for the French, tells you exactly where the units go. Great. Same thing with the Prussians. And because the areas are nicely labeled, the circles on one point, someone might say they're, a rather large graphic that covers the map, so you just have a bunch of dots. But in actuality, that's very helpful for me. It made it really easy to find things. So aside from the fact that they are pretty big, that's actually more useful than a detraction, I think. So pretty easy to find where these initial troops go. We're going to start with turn one, and on the play aids. First of all, these play aids, when I was playing just kind of a sample game, were fantastic. My only complaint as far as the play aids go was here when I was talking about boundaries of moving between areas. There's one here, it says it's a difficult boundary if I was to move up. It looks like there's the basic road or just basic boundary, and then it shows like two different shades of color. And I wasn't sure if they were talking like, really, if I go from this yellowish to a green, is that difficult for some reason? So the way I'm going to play it is, if you're going from, say, a city to a zero, or from woods to woods, or city to city, or some combination thereof, that's difficult because cities have a lot of stuff in the way, and when you're trying to move troops in semi-organized fashion in rows and columns, because this was still an era of somewhat organized Napoleonic warfare where they still marched in the rows and stuff like that. That started to change because the technology really started to change around this time. I'm not an expert on that, but that's something I read from some other games where kind of based on this, like the Metz game, some other things like that. But anywho, so in my mind I'm thinking, okay, if I'm going from forest to forest, or forest to city, or city to clear, or clear to city, that's difficult going because you're transitioning between crowded areas to non, and so on and so forth, and you have to reorganize yourself. Whereas if you're going in open, shouldn't be a problem. So that's how I'm interpreting the boundary for that. The rest of the boundaries, everything kind of makes sense. So that was the only thing where I kind of had to apply my own what made sense to the situation. Alright, so I don't have everything out on display for you. I've got a couple of my cards off to the side, the draw piles, and we're going to try using cards. Normally when I play solo, I leave cards out, but in this game, you only draw one card per player per turn, essentially, and you only get to have 3 in your hand. So card management is pretty easy. If you go beyond 3, you got to discard a card. So we're going to start pulling a French card. I got Opportunity Fire. This says, conditions. Prussian units completed their movement impulse adjacent to French units. Okay, cool. So if you end next to a French, the Prussian impulse after completion, when you play it though, the Prussian impulse after completion of Prussian units movement activation. Okay, so you stop, and then when they complete their movement activation, then the French can pop in and do something. It says, select an area. French ready units that in that area may fire at Prussian units that completed their movement adjacent to them. Resolve fire after Prussian units become fatigued, but before they have the opportunity to take control of the area. French do not become fatigued upon completion of this fire. Okay, cool. So move next to a French unit, and we get to shoot at you if we so choose. And why wouldn't you? It's free. It doesn't fatigue you. Then the Prussians drew starving French soldiers. There's no conditions needed to play it. The play phase. Prussian impulse. It'd be nice if I had a nice card graphic overlay on the video of the card. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. Maybe scan. I don't know. We'll see. Otherwise, I'll just kind of hold it like this. You can zoom in. Maybe I'll just zoom in. There we go. You can pause and read too. You can read right along. French soldiers suffer of starvation. Okay. Select an area occupied by French units. All units in the area must pass a morale check. Those that fail become disrupted. No effect on already disrupted units. Historical note. Although they were located just a few miles from Paris, the French troops in Le Bourget hadn't received any food supply for 2 days. As the French army's quartermasters hadn't been notified, they had moved to a new position. Oh, crazy. So that would be good to play right now, but there's a recovery phase in which you can roll dice and get your disruption back. I think that one would be better served. Sorry for shifting the camera like that. I think that would be better served when the troops are closer to fighting, and then it says the Prussian impulse before any Prussian. So I think before we do combat, it would be nice to just say, okay, boom, disrupted. Because then if there's any losses, it's easier to take out a disrupted unit, because that's basically like a step loss. So the units are going to basically have 3 step losses, if you will. So here's like the unwounded side. If you flip it, that's fatigued, and then they can become disrupted, and then from that point they can be removed. So if you have something that's disrupted, then you could fatigue it, then it would be fatigued, disrupted, and then it could be removed. So I mean, slightly easier to damage. All right, so we've got our 2 cards to use. And then on my handy dandy segment chart, it says the impulse phase. So the impulse phase starts with the Prussian player always, and then you can like move, you can, there's several actions here. I wish they were on the chart too. I don't always remember all of them, but basically it's like you can move, you can fire, you can pass, you can even fatigue an area to draw an event card if you needed it. So just to make sure I'm right, yeah, movement, fire, event card drawing, or pass. Well, we came to fight. Now, the French, I think, would be in a good position just to really stay in the city, because there's a defensive bonus for them if they control that when they fight. And so that's +3 in their favor, +4 at the church. So that's great. Plus they get victory points for holding it essentially at the end of the game. So if the Prussians don't come in, then they're hurting. So we want to get the Prussians moving up there to either start shooting in there or fighting. So let's do that. Now you get to activate 1 sector. So what I'm going to do is shift the camera over here. And we got some units over here that we can move. So movement is basically, you have a little handy dandy, like I said, the movement chart here. So if you move to a clear area, it's 1 movement point. There's no combat terrain modifiers. Now movement points, the Prussian cavalry, the Ulanen, they get 5 movement points. All the infantry get 4 movement points, and the 1 unit of French artillery gets 3 movement points. So there's no movement point indicator on the counters. It's not needed. So they get 4 movement points. So going from space to space is going to be 1. Now the boundaries, if you're crossing a land boundary, there's no additional cost. If you're crossing water, it's 1 movement point to cross. So like if we crossed, trying to I guess just shift the camera a little bit. So if I was crossing the water, in addition to the cost for the train, I'd have to add 1 movement point for crossing the water. And then units crossing the boundary undergo a morale check at the end of their movement to check to see if they get disruption. Because again, they have to reorganize themselves after crossing. They've had to get in boats, cross on boats, pontoon, whatever. Or even if it's little land bridges that they create, then we have to reform once we cross. There's also difficult boundaries like the railroad. And then that's what I was saying, here it shows a change in color. So if I was, in my mind, if I'm going from this field into the city, then that would be a difficult. We'd roll for disruption after that. And then, 1 movement point across if the entered area is not friendly controlled. Okay, so these open areas are essentially neutral. Friendly controlled means that there's enemy units in it, or if it was enemy controlled. Basically, there's control markers that you could put on things, and if you wanted, it was an option that said you don't have to, but for all the starting like French areas, for example, you could put the marker indicating French control. I'm going to leave those off and just put it on if it changes hands. So if it becomes Prussian, then we'll put the Prussian control. So if a Prussian unit entered from here and crossed into the church, that would cost that extra movement point because it's owned by the French. So that's how we're going to run that. Otherwise, I think we're okay. The other thing, too, is someone could talk about the difficult boundary as far as this graphic, is it does have the very faint lines of like the fields, and then there's no lines on that side. So, for example, these squares here, or areas, have these little like field lines in them, and then this doesn't. So that's another reason why I was thinking, you know, just when you cross into cities or forests, because the forests don't have those little tiny lines. I just wish that part was just a little bit more clear for me, but that's how I'm interpreting it. All right, well, movement. So you get to pick any area you want to start with. I figured I'd start over here, and crossing this major road boundary is nothing extra. So I mean, I could, like, if we want to say take the cemetery, for instance, we could take a couple people, 1, 2. Now we could go in and assault, or what we could do is say, yeah, we want to maybe shoot in there and try to whittle them down a little bit before we jump in. We could try that. But what I would do is I would take these two guys and flip them. Then with him, what I could do is I could play the opportunity fire, which is the play the impulse after the Prussian completes movement, select an area. We're going to do a fire attack, and then we'll attack again. So was that a good idea on my part? It doesn't matter, right? We're just playing. Let me shift the camera over a little bit more so you can see the action here. Alright, so to do combat on this handy dandy, combat is pretty simple. In fact, combat in general, either the firing or hand-to-hand, or, you know, when everybody's in the same space, is pretty easy. I would say this would be a fantastic introductory game for folks. It does have some crunch, but not much. There is somewhat a few things as far as crunch that kind of bothered me a little bit. All of the counters are labeled with units. You know, the unit they belong to, their hierarchy, their division, whatever. But like that means nothing. There's nothing about unit cohesions or anything like that. So that's why this lends towards a more introductory game. Is really you're just focused on two numbers. This number here is a fire value up in the corner here, this number 1, and then down here is their morale. That's pretty much all you need to track. That's great. So it doesn't matter if they're divisions, corps, or anything like that. All these are pretty much, I think it said divisions. I don't remember. But so that part's pretty easy. So let's take a look here. So it doesn't matter if I had mixed, you know, like the 35th in here, 28th. All these unit designators really don't mean anything except for their historical placements at the start of the game. Doesn't matter if you have mixed units fighting, you know, there's no general commands or anything like that. So to fire, we get the total fire factor. So if you add up the number of units with a firing value, so 1. If it was fatigued, it could still fire, but it contributes a 0 because their fatigued side has 0 combat value for firing. So at least they start with a 1. Then if there's more than 4 enemy units in the target area, it's a +1, but there's only 2. If the firing units are French, because they had like a really nice rifle, apparently, nice technologically superior rifle, so they get to add a +1. There's no friendly units in the target area, so we're going to take that +2. And I found a really small dice cup, so I could fit it on camera. So that's 9 plus 2 is 11. I misplaced a 20-sided die, so I'm just going to keep track over here with a couple of dice. 11. That's the total shooting value. Then the defense value for the non-active player. would be you add the highest morale. When they flip, their morale goes down by 1. So the Prussians start with a 9 morale. So they're very motivated to get out here and fight. On their fatigue side after marching, they're currently an 8. So we're going to take 8. If there's any protection provided by the combat terrain, nope, there is 0. So they're just hanging out in the open fields. If we're only Prussian Schutzen or French F tiers, I'm not sure what that stands for. Well, I'm assuming that must be some sort of light unit. So they do better on the defense if they're the only one in there. So there's no bonus for that. So from what I'm getting off the combat chart, basically I'm taking an 8. And then you only add a die 6 to the defender. So 8. I rolled a 2, which is a 10. Ooh. So that was good. I mean, if the total offense was 11 and I had an 8, I had to roll 3 or higher to take no damage. But we do take 1 loss point. So the active player may flip a ready unit to its fatigued side. They're already fatigued. So I can retreat a fatigued unit at an eligible adjacent area. And I think that's what I will do. So I'm just going to take a unit and fall back. And retreat, there's probably some elements of retreat that I'll forget, but the basics pretty easy. You fall back 1 adjacent area unless it's occupied by enemies, or that was pretty much it. There's some other restrictions for retreat, but since I have a lot of clear open areas around me, I don't think it'll be a problem to have them fall back. So they retreat 1 out. Well, that's not too bad. So the French played an opportunity fire. Oh, and remember, they played the card, so they're not fatigued. So technically, this guy could fire again. Might as well. They were able to force them back, so let's try again. So it's going to be the same thing. It's 1 fire factor value. They're French, that's +2. So we're going to roll 2 die 6. So that's going to be a 10 total. All right, easy enough. And then the French player, same thing. They start with an 8 morale. They don't have any other bonuses, so they're going to add a die 6 to the roll. They roll 5. So 8 and 5 is 13. So that time, the French fire was not very effective. Overall, that was not too bad for either player. We didn't really suffer any huge casualties. We do have 1 unit pushed back, which means if we want to go into melee, it'll take an extra turn to move in. It wasn't really that bad. And it wasn't really that good for the French either, because we didn't disrupt anybody. It was just kind of meh. But that's fine, because it's just 1 defending unit there, right? Not much that they can do. All right, now they become fatigued. So I played a card, that didn't fatigue them. They did this fire, they're now fatigued. And we could bring some reinforcements, but again, I think we want to try and defend, right? We got good defensive values for combat, so the French, I don't think, really want to move out, but we do see Prussians coming, so we might want to take some defensive positions here. So again, moving from forest to forest, if I look at my movement chart, that's 1 movement point if friendly controlled. All right, simple enough. So we're going to go 1, and we take 1 extra move point for crossing a barrier, a water boundary. So it's 1 to cross. There is notes here. If you're crossing here, there's a bridge, so that could be good. Units crossing the blue boundary from area 47 to 58 do not spend any movement points, nor need to pass a morale check for doing so, as long as these both areas are friendly controlled, because that's a bridge. But here, this is going to be difficult to control. So this is 2 movement points, and this is going to be 4 movement points. Now, here's the thing, and I don't know if I like this or not. It makes you pause, because what happens is when you get to your destination, you flip them over to their fatigue side. Easy enough. Then, because you pass difficult boundaries along the way, you're going to have to roll a morale check to see if any of them become disrupted. So they're fatigued after making the journey, but disrupted because they have to reform after getting through a forest, 2 sets of forest and crossing rivers. That makes sense. And then you have to roll for each difficult boundary crossed. So we did cross a difficult boundary here, and we crossed a difficult boundary here, so that's 2. But the other thing is, I'm like, do we also... I think it's just the water boundary. It doesn't matter if it's a forest necessarily, because I went from forest to forest. I didn't go from clear to whatever. So I don't think there's an extra just because you went from like forest to forest. I guess if you went city to city, that doesn't count as a difficult boundary because you're in the city. I think it's only when you're transitioning from an open area to a city, according to my little chart. So this doesn't count as going into a difficult. Just crossing the river is the difficult boundary. That's fine. But see, what you got to do now is you got to make 2 rolls. So every unit has to make 2 rolls for every difficult boundary they cross once they reach their destination. So what you have to decide is the player moving them then, because obviously the more times you roll, the greater chance of them becoming disrupted is. So do you push and push and push to get them somewhere? Because again, they can't do a whole lot when they're disrupted because you have to pass a morale check to get rid of disruption. But we'll do it. So 1 roll, 8. So already 1 unit is disrupted, and I'll stop at that for that unit. As soon as a unit becomes disrupted, I'll move on to the next unit. So second unit in the stack, 9, they're disrupted. So even if I only moved 1, they're all getting disrupted. And I have to roll 7 or less on their fatigue side. 8. So that entire stack got to where they needed to be, but now they're disrupted. So I'm just going to stick a disrupted on top of that whole stack. All right, well, they moved into a position where I wanted them to be, but now they're disrupted, and that area is done. All right, so we're going to move some more Prussians up to support the assault here on whatever flank this is. So we'll move, can you see them? Yes. So we're going to go 1, 2, let's see, 1, 2, 3. We could actually go in, although they would have to check for disruption on moving in because that's going, they might not want to do that. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, if we move in, we'd have to see if they get disrupted, and my dice rolling have shown that, yeah, they can get disrupted. Oh, you know what? I clipped the corners, but did I miss that one? Hold on. That's not planned. Yeah, that one was clipped, but it just doesn't look very well clipped. All right, well, he's clipped. Alright, so that is done. So I activated an area for the Prussians. Now it goes back to the French. French, they see a lot of Prussians coming. So let's move. These guys are close. So we'll go 1, 2. We're going to move here. 1, 2, 3. We crossed the river. So we're going to make some rolls to see if they're disrupted. I'm only going to make 1. I'm only going to cross 1 river with them. So hopefully the odds of not becoming disrupted are better. Oh, but now that they've arrived, you have to flip them to the fatigue side, then make the morale check. So 1 unit is good because it's under 7. Next one, a 7, that's good. Tie or less is fine. And then finally, that's a 6. So good. That whole unit, no disruption. They are closer to combat ready than the other group. Then the Prussians. All right, we're going to move another one up. Now you can have up to 6 friendly units in a space. So we're going to go ahead and overload this one here. 1, 2, 3. That puts a total of 5 in there. They're all Franz. I can just put them in one stack, but I don't like big stacks. So this game, so really, you could have some stacks of like 8 or 9 counters because you're going to have possibly a disruption, your stack of 6, and then possibly there might be a control in there, but you don't have to make it part of a stack. That'd be in the hex. And then close combat. Yeah, so really your personal stack I think is going to max out at about 7 counters. That's not terrible. I know some people hate any kind of stacks at all. My wife does, but I've played games where, you know, you can get some pretty big stacks. But if you got a space, you know, putting them out like that's okay by me. All right. So I think that was the French just finished moving, and I think I just brought some Prussians. We'll go back. If I stop to talk to y'all, I forget who does what. Where I'm at, I need like a Prussian French coin that I can flip so I know who's doing something. Oh, you know, I think we draw a card just at the beginning of the turn. Yeah, if I need more cards, I would use an impulse to grab cards, but you get a free card at the beginning of a turn. The game is played, I think, here. Each player starts with a card. Yeah, event card drawing phase. Yeah, that's one of the steps. Yeah, that's the first thing. I was just thinking about, I was looking, the French have no cards to play, and it's like, well, since I don't want to do a lot of moving, I think what I'll do is I'll fatigue, because you fatigue one area, so I'm going to fatigue a guy over here. He's off the map, but let me make sure that's right. I just fatigue an area. Luckily, the rules being so short, it's pretty easy to find what you're looking for, so I just open it up right here. The active player may elect to draw an event card from their deck as per rules. In order to do so, the player must first select an area and flip all the ready units in the area to their fatigue side. So I just picked a spot that only had one lone French guy down in the glass factory, and we're going to draw a French card. We draw the end phase. Oh, well, play immediately. If you draw an end phase event card for the first time, set the event card aside, visible in your used event card pile. When a second one is drawn, set it aside as well. If a third one is drawn and two end phase cards are in either player's used end card pile, the impulse phase ends immediately. Proceed to close combat phase and return both players all end phase card to their respective piles. Yeah, so this is fine. I ended a phase. So if you get several of those, and that's the only thing is, it was like, if you have two, so I think there has to be either two French or two Prussian, so it's not like one French, one Prussian, and then this is a third. It says, when a second one is drawn, set it aside as well, which I'm assuming is from here. If a third one is drawn and two end phase cards are in either player's used end card pile. So that's the only thing, just based on the wording. Oh, here it is. Just based on that wording, I'm not entirely sure if that means the French player has to have two, or the Prussian player has two, and then when the third one pops out, you're done. Or if it's like one French, you know, the French player could have one, the Prussian player could have one, and then you draw technically another one, that'd be the third. It's like if it's a combination of two. That's the only thing on here that I wasn't too sure about as far as these end phase cards go. But this is just number one. And unless you spend a lot of time drawing these during your turn, during the impulse, you might not end that action phase that way. I could be wrong. Maybe in another turn it could come up. Okay, so the French player drew an end phase, and that's it for them because they fatigued a group. So the Prussians are going to move some more people here. 1, 2, 3. We're going to go here. We're going to start surrounding the town. So they're fatigued. The French are going to fire. So we add up their combat value. Since there's 3 units, they each have a fire factor of 1. So 1, 2, 3. So looking to see the other benefits there. There's 4 enemy units. There is not. +1 if the firing units are French. So they're at a +4 already. And then we roll 2 dice 6. Bombs away. So 8 + 4, that's 12. That's pretty respectable. So I've got a little side tracker. 10 and 2 is 12. Then, again, the Prussian defenders here take their highest morale. And There's no protection. But that's pretty much it. So they take their 8s. They're going to roll a die 6. They're trying to get a 12 or higher. They got a 12. So they took no casualties on that move. And they all become fatigued. In the beginning, I could have split units between area 49. Let's see here. Just shifted a little bit. I could have put, it said I could put 6 in either 49 or 51 or split like a combination. So I opted to put 3 here and 3 over here because I saw there's Prussians up off that edge of the map. So if I had had them all, in 49, I think we would have had much better fire results. We would have actually inflicted some casualties, I think. The drawback is then that would leave, one area underprotected. So I thought by splitting, it might be good. I don't know. Large stacks definitely, like in most games, large stacks I think give you a nice kill team, but then leaves me less defended elsewhere. So give and take. But now it's the Prussian player. But we do have some units over here. Let me shift the camera there. We're going to go up north there. I don't know if that's north on the map. I didn't look, but yeah, it is north. So that northeast corner of the map. Here's a group of Augusta. There's 4 in here. So we're going to go 1, 2, right here. And we'll go ahead and get there because we're going to do some firing into the city. Probably not. I tell you, definitely the advantage is to the French defender at this point because they've got good defensive values in there. Oh, now this might be bad because this has the artillery. And then they have a huge stack. I think this is 6. So that's actually probably not a good way to start. So we're there. We'll go for it. So the French are going to fire back. And everything's going to fire. They get to add in the artillery, which has a fire factor of 2. Let's zoom that in a little bit so you can kind of see better here. This is a stack of 6. 1, 2. Yeah, that's my 6. So they're already starting with an 8. Add 1 because they're French. So that's 9. Holy cow. And there are 4 Prussians. So that's 10. And we're going to add 2 dice 6. Oh, lucky. 13. There's a chance the Prussian player might laugh that off. Ha! In your fancy guns. Alright, so that's 13. We can actually beat that. Have to roll really well. Because we're starting with morale of 8. There's no defensive terrain bonus. It's not the cavalry. I think the cavalry got a defensive bonus. One of these. Or the Scherzen. They're not the Scherzen. So I got to roll a 5 or a 6 if I want to take no damage from all of that firing. I rolled a 1. Oh, that's actually, but that's bad too. So that's a 9. So they had a 13. That's a difference of 4. So, well, but again, that's not terrible because since they're fatigued, you can retreat. So I can just retreat that whole stack. All right. And that would be 4 losses there. That's not bad. Again, I know the Prussian player is trying to get up in there, was hoping that they could stay there, flip a turn, and then maybe fire into the city. But even got a 2 defense value there. Okay, so that was the French. So all of this needs to flip. It's the only problem then with large stacks and my fat fingers is getting the whole thing to flip. Flip. There it is. Alright, well, we've got some more Prussian units up here in the northeast that want to come and play. Alright, so let's take the Elizabeth unit. But see, now that they're fatigued, not that that matters, I don't think, too much, but now that they're fatigued, I can move up. They can't shoot. But we'll go ahead. Actually, we'll go ahead and we'll move this Elizabeth unit. That's got 4 in it as well. 1, 2. And they will go ahead and take it. You know, I forgot I got the starving French player, which we might do that in a second. Okay, now this stack, I think it only had 5. 1, 2, no, that's got 6 as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But they'll shoot. They don't have the added artillery bonus, so their firepower is slightly less, but it will start at a 6 plus 1 because they are French. And there's more enemy. There's 4 or more, so that's 8 plus 2 dice 6. So 8 plus 2 dice 6. 8 and 7 is 15. Here, that's just the edge of the battle area. Let's just bring it in a little bit better for you. Alright, so yeah, that's 17. Now that's good. That was a good roll. That beat the really terrible roll I had on the last one. That's 17. Okay, so they're going to have a very hard time withstanding 17. They definitely are going to take some casualties. They felt emboldened by this first counter fire, but now that's terrible. So they get 8, because you start with the highest morale value, so they're starting with an 8. They have no other bonuses, and they get to add 1 die 6 to that. So we would have to roll a 6 if we want to really kind of offset that. 8. 8, 3 is 11. So that's a difference of 6. So we're going to, 1, push back those 4. And then flip a ready unit to its fatigued side, or remove from play a fatigued unit, or flip a ready unit to its fatigued side and retreat it. But if they're already fatigued, flip a ready unit to its fatigued side. 1 loss point. They were already on their fatigued side after moving. The retreat a fatigued unit to an eligible... Oh, I guess they don't go to disrupted. I thought disruption was a part of their combat losses, but actually, no, it's not. No disruption. I was wrong at the beginning when I was setting it up. They don't have 3-step losses. They only got 2. Bummer. I was just reminded that by reading the combat chart. So, if I took 6... Oh, okay, so this would play... Yeah. Oh, that was very bad assaulting that like that then. That didn't work out in the Prussian favor at all. So they actually just lost 2 units because they pushed back 4 here. I pushed back 4, so that was 4 of the step losses I had to endure, and then an extra point to remove fatigued units from the game. So there's no stepping to disruption. Disruption is just simply a matter of movement, it seems. Okay, that sucks for the Prussians, but the French players now fatigued here in this little small spot, 38. Will that do anything for the Prussians? I don't know. We can now move some Prussians up to exchange gunfire. That's about it. Okay, so the French fired. I have some Prussians over here as well. We're going to move them up. We're going to move them 1, 2. We're going to move them here. 1, 2, 3. In anticipation of shooting as well. I don't know what's better is to shoot. Because with shooting, you don't have the chance of losing stuff yourself if you roll bad on your shooting. But with combat, the attacker has a chance to lose if you don't bring an overwhelming amount of people. So the defender with 6 is already in good hands because you get a ratio bonus. So like if you bring more people than the defender, like if the defender has 4 people, you bring 6, you get to add +2 to your attack roll. So right now, we don't want to launch an attack in here until I can guarantee I can fit 6. What I could have done is move these 4 in, and then move 2 in, and max that area out, because you only have 6 per side in there. Then it would have been 6 versus 6 combat. Instead, I was hoping to maybe pepper them down a little bit with gunfire, because even if I have them retreat deeper into the city, then I could like start to come in and capture some spots. But there we go. The Prussians have moved. The French are going to stay there because I can't move in to reinforce that. So I think the French player is going to pass. But here's the thing: if you pass, then the rest of the impulses go to your opponent. You don't get to do anything except like play a card, but you don't get to activate stuff. So since we have a lot of French gathering, we will move some, or a lot of Prussians are starting to gather. We're going to look at this side of the board for just a second. And I think what I'll do is the French player, I think the French player is going to go ahead and move some units up just to start. Like this looks like it's the line of battle here is all across this front. So let's go ahead and do that. That's just regular boundary. Once I cross that river, we're going to have to make some disruption checks. And this is a stack of 5. So 1 movement point, 2 movement points. Oh, look, and 3 movement points because it's a bridge. All right, perfect. So we don't have to make any disruption checks, but we are going to fatigue out so we know that they've done something. Prussians are going to move some more units from off camera up here. So they're going to go 1. I'm just pre-looking here. We're going to move some 1, 2, 3. Right there. We just move some units here simply because it's in the open, easy to move them up. Oh, this is interesting. I just thought of that. The artillery was supposed to place there, and it's already got 6 infantry. Did I put the artillery in the wrong spot? It said area 37 or 38. That's 38. And then area 37 has 6. Area 38 has 6. That would mean the game would start overstacked, right? I guess the artillery is a special. Does it not count? I think there's a thing, stacking limit. At the end of any unit movement or retreat, there can only be a limited number of friendly units in any given area. This is the stacking limit. The maximum number of friendly infantry units that can occupy is 6. Okay, cool. The French artillery battery and the Prussian Uhlonen platoon do not count. Okay, good. So the cavalry and the artillery don't count towards. I'm glad. I saw that, and I know I read that in the rules earlier, but I just looked at that and I said to myself, wait a minute, that would put 7. All right, so just the infantry count towards stacking. All right, we're cool, we're good. And the only 2 units in here that are not infantry is the French artillery, and then I've got over here the the Prussian cavalry, which is in area 15. All right, cool, we're good. So we just moved them up. We just moved some French. I think we'll go ahead and move some more Prussians in. Now, when you activate an area, that is one thing. You could move you could activate like maybe 4 units to move, but then you can't mix orders in a phase. Like you can't say you 2 are going to move this direction and you 2 will move here. Once you decide who's moving, they all move in the same direction and go in the same place. So you can't split them off, or in an impulse you can't say, in one impulse you can't say you 2 are firing, you 2 are moving. It's either they all fire or they all move. So we're issuing a move order to some more units here on the east, and we're going to activate that area to move them all. 1, 2, 3. We're going to go here. 1, 2, 3. That's 4 movement points. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think I've been trying to move all these guys up to 5 movement points when they only have 4. So I may have cheated down here. I may have cheated already over here and miscounted my movement points. I might have moved this group too far forward. I think it took 5 movement points to get here because of the river. If they started here, we're okay, and I don't remember where they started. What I should have done was cross the bridge and then came over and not worried about disruption rolls at all. Why didn't I do that? Now that you're looking at that, you probably wondered that when I first moved. Like, why didn't you cross the bridge? Well, if you watched the video this far, now you know why. I didn't think about it. So I tried to move them and got them disrupted for no reason. Because you can overstack during movement, but you can't end your movement overstacked. So if there were people here, I could have easily just taken that group and moved them here for 1 movement point because they used the bridge, and then cross this little boundary there, which is nothing. And again, that would have been 2 movement points versus the 4 or 5 wherever I moved them from and disrupted. All right, well, now we know better. Let's come back here real quick. I don't know why I thought of that just now, but I did. So 4 movement points to get here, and they become fatigued. Fatigued. Whoops. I could just stick them all in one stack, but, you know, there's Schertzen and Alexander. I'll keep them separate. All right, they're fatigued. Then the French player says, I'm going to shoot into there. There's only 3, so they're going to start with 3 firepower. It's French. That becomes a 4. And the unit, there's more than 4 there. So now that's a 5 plus 5. And add 2 die 6 to the roll. 8 and 5 is 13. I mean, it's not terrible. But the Prussians are starting with 8. There's no other bonuses. So they're going to add a die 6 to that. That is a unit of Schertzen, but they have mix, so it doesn't count. And they're standing in a 0. So it's going to be 8 plus... Oops, it fell out. Let's keep it in. 8 plus 3 is 11. That's a difference of 4. So we can actually have these guys fall back, and then that's the extent of their points. Now I left the Schertzen because Schertzen get a defense bonus if they're the only ones in an area when they're shot at. So we'll actually leave them right there for the moment. All right. And the French player's looking at the board, going, we'll pass. I got a couple units I could move over here in the southern part of the board, but I think they're okay for now. Well, this guy in the cemetery is all by himself, so let's move up. 1, 2, 3. I can't cross the river anyway, so he'll stop right there. And then Prussian player does have here up in the north just 1 more stack to move. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Now if I move up, because you gotta move them, you can't like leave some behind, I would then be ending here in an overstack situation. I could have just moved 2 and moved all the way in here, but if I end here, then that will be a stack of 6. So we'll do that. They'll just go here and make a stack of 6. They're all Elizabeth, so they can... And then later I could just take 2 and move them in and make another stack of 6. Like I could just slowly fill in there. I did pass for the French, so I have this 1 Prussian cavalry that's been sitting over here. And from the little historical note I read, they didn't have... I'm trying to figure out where I want that camera at. They didn't have a huge impact on the battle, apparently. They just kind of did like some skirmishing type of maneuvers. They didn't really go in. They can't even move into the city, so they just kind of like... I'm going to use them maybe to kind of flank around. That's what I'm going to do. now that the French have moved up to fight the Prussian infantry, the Prussian cavalry is going to start to move to the southern edge of the board and capture some of these open areas that the French left behind. Ooh, I should have thought of that ahead of time. But we're going to go, I think you can see it here in a second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so why is that a problem? Well, first of all, cavalry gets 5 movement, right? Everybody else gets 4, artillery gets 3, so they can't move 6. So they're going to move here, and they have to check for disruption, so they get flipped to their fatigue side because that's where they're moving. They roll 2 dice. They got to get under 8 to not get disrupted. 8, so no disruption on the cavalry, but they're done. So that would be the end of a turn. So what we would do there is check the recovery phase. Recovery phase is where we check for disrupted units. Let me just make sure on that real quick. Recovery phase, flip all units back to their ready sides. That's the first thing. Alright, well, as a solo player, that means I gotta take a minute. So we'll do that real quick. Flippity flip flip. Ooh, flip, flip, flip. See, with 2 players, right, you'd make your buddy flip their units. Well, I don't have any buddies, so I gotta flip them all by myself. All by myself. Gotta flip them all by myself. Couple more. Flipping the big stacks, I never liked that in any game. They didn't do anything, so we flip here. Yeah, sorry, I got the camera in a spot where you can't see all the flipping. You can't see all the flipping action. I get it. Okay, flip. Almost done though. So everybody will be ready. So the fatigue and being pushed back on a retreat isn't like the worst. That's what I was saying. It's really not that bad. I mean, it sets you back. You have to move forward again. You can't just shoot. But at least it's, you know, you just flip them back from fatigued. All right. Oh, and then these guys were fatigued. They were just disrupted. All right, so yeah, key point to remember, disruption is not a part of combat. That's just prevents you from fighting and moving. Basically, you can't activate them. They can participate in firing, like if you were next. No, they can't even fire. They're just basically just kind of have to sit there. I'll reread the disruption when I need that. They didn't have to do anything while they were disrupted, so I didn't have to remember that. All right, then we do disruption recovery. Starting with the Prussian player, then the French one. Players may check if their disrupted units recover from disruption by passing a morale check. Morale checks are done individually for each disrupted unit. When a disrupted unit succeeds in passing a morale check, remove the disrupted marker from the unit. For a unit to pass a morale check, the owning player rolls 2 dice 6 if the dice roll result is less or equal to the unit's current morale rating. Remember, the morale of a disrupted unit is reduced by 1. The unit successfully passes a morale check. Okay, that's good to know. So they have a 7. And there's 3 there, so I'm going to make 3 rolls. And we're going to see, of the 3, how many get undisrupted. They're not fatigued anymore, but they're still disrupted. So that's a 4. One of them passes. 6, another one passes. 5. So all of them lose the disruption. So bam. There. It's as if they didn't fatigue themselves out crossing all those rivers and through the woods and into cities. They did fine. And that is that. Then it's the end of the turn. Game turn marker advances to turn 2, so it goes from 8 o'clock to 8:30. Check the victory level. Eliminated Prussian units and, well, French too. Basically, you take the number of eliminated Prussian or French units divided by 2. So there was 2 eliminated Prussian units. That's 1 victory point. Right now, if I was to end it right now, I'd also had to count victory points for these cities. Right now, it's a French victory because they have the most victory points in town. 2, 4, 6, and it's these stars. So here's 2, 4, well, that's 5, 6, 7 for the cemetery, 7, 8 for a lot. I don't think there's any more stars on the board. So 8 victory points. That would be a tactical victory for the French right now. But that's turn 1. I think I missed a star right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No, that's 8. And then 9. So actually 9 because I add my... That's still a tactical victory. Well, that's 1 turn. That puts us at about an hour. No pauses or anything like that. Just a straight play through. And after playing and you know, reminding myself on some of the rules, I think that is mostly played correctly. I hope so. So again, if you find mistakes, let me know. I think I caught a couple as I went along. That's the problem when you play solo. It's so easy to kind of forget things. I don't have somebody here to correct me. That's what I use all of you for, is correct me after the fact, and hopefully I'll get it on the next playthrough. I'm going to play 1 more turn. I mean, now that's generally how these games go, right? You spend 1 turn kind of moving. Now that everybody is in position, and we kind of have a defined line of battle here, right? The French are right along here, Prussians right on the other side. So we'll probably continue this tomorrow. But yeah, we definitely now have a nice defined who's where. I kind of like that. We'll play 1 more turn at least. I thought I'd play like 1 turn and call it good, but now that everybody has finally moved up and they can actually start shooting, the French are still in a heavily good positions because even though there's a lot of Prussians coming in, the Prussians are still kind of spread out. So I could definitely see the advantage of making, you know, big stacks because that gives you more firepower. Because 1 little unit by himself, that's only 1 fire factor, and then, you know, even though he gets to roll 2 dice 6 on that, that's not really a whole lot. Now the French do have a lower morale, but then they're in cities too, so it's like, yeah, it's gonna be hard to see how that plays out. But we'll give this one more turn, and then maybe you'll see some close combat. We'll move some units into a square or an area, and you can see how that works. But again, overall, I don't think it's a complicated game. You can just jump right in, start pushing everything. The combat isn't that difficult to figure out. There's only a few modifiers to it. With fire, you just, if the attacker scores higher than the defender, then you apply that many step losses, and the difference between the attacker-defender score. When it's combat, it's kind of the same thing. It's just that the difference is, with fire combat, if the defender has a higher value, you stop. But if it's combat, then the defender, if there's a difference, the defender would apply those step losses to the attacker, and that could cause maybe units to retreat. So that's one thing I did like that. I thought that was pretty cool, and we'll try and force some in area combat on the next turn that we play. So I do like their combat, because a lot of games, you know, they have it built into where, like, if you assault and you fail, then like the attacker falls back a square, that kind of a stuff. But here, that's built in because the difference, you know, how many step losses you take, that will determine if a fatigued unit retreats, or if they're not fatigued, then they become fatigued, and if they're fatigued, then they can retreat. So that's built into the difference in the values you get between the attacking value. It's nice. It's very simple. So I think, honestly, if you were trying to introduce someone just to war gaming, this is actually a very good game to start with and go from there. But I will leave it at that. Yeah, we didn't really change control of anything. Like I said, this was just that first turn of moving the troops up, and we'll go from there. Well, that's enough for me rambling on. Thank you if you watched it this far. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next video. Have a good day.